All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling something pretty fascinating: disruptive innovation.
Definitely a hot topic.
We've got excerpts from Seeing What's Next by Clayton Christensen and his co-authors to guide us. It's all about those game-changing shifts that can make or break industries.
Right, like think back to Western Union dismissing the telephone.
Exactly. We'll unpack why even giants can miss those signals.
What's really interesting about disruptive innovation is that it's not always about, some super flashy technology.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about the newest gadget.
No, it's about understanding how those, what might seem like small shifts, can create entirely new markets.
Okay, so a shift in how value is delivered.
Exactly. And often these disruptions start by appealing to like a niche or overlooked market with a simpler, maybe cheaper solution.
So like the early days of personal computers, they weren't as powerful as those big mainframes, but they opened up a whole new market.
Right. For individuals, small businesses. Now, Seeing What's Next talks about two main types of disruptive innovation, right? We've got new market disruptions, which create entirely new markets.
So those are the ones that target people who weren't even considered consumers before.
Exactly. Like imagine the world before Kodak cameras or the Bell telephone. Those weren't just improving on existing products.
They were bringing something totally new to the table.
Right. And then the other type, we've got low-end disruption.
Okay, and those target the most price-sensitive customers in an existing market, right?
Yes. Like,
They're-
think about what MCI did with long-distance calling. They didn't have all the features of AT&T, but their lower prices were attractive to a certain segment of customers.
That makes sense. But Seeing What's Next doesn't just tell us about the types of disruption, it also goes into the reasons why some companies thrive and others don't in this environment.
Right. One of the most important concepts is what Christensen calls the resources, processes, and values theory, or RPV for short.
Catchy. So what's the idea behind RPV?
Well, it's about why established companies often struggle with disruptive innovations.
Because their existing resources, processes, and values just aren't set up for it.
Exactly. Their processes are often geared toward incremental improvements, not these huge leaps into new markets.
And their values often center on maintaining those high profit margins.
Right. So they might not be as keen to invest in something that seems like it'll have lower margins initially, even if those innovations have the potential for huge growth down the line.
It's like they're so focused on the present that they miss the future. Which reminds me, Seeing What's Next also brings up the jobs to be done framework. That seems like a really useful tool for understanding the unmet needs that disruptive innovations often address.
It is. The jobs to be done framework really shifts the focus from analyzing, product features to understanding the fundamental needs that customers are trying to fulfill.
Okay, so it's less about what the product is and more about why the customer chooses it.
Yes. Like, let's think about the healthcare industry for a second. Okay. Traditionally, you'd have to schedule an appointment with your doctor for any medical advice. But then we got telemedicine platforms.
Which let you have virtual consultations from home. Much more convenient.
Right. They're addressing a specific job that customers need done, getting medical advice easily and quickly.
That's a perfect example. So how can we spot these opportunities for disruption before they become huge? Seeing What's Next gives us some clues, right?
Yeah. One is something called non-consumption. Basically, are there large groups of people who aren't using existing solutions because they're too expensive, complicated, or inconvenient?
Okay, so you're looking for the underserved, the people who are falling through the cracks of the current system.
Exactly. Like, think about all the people who weren't using computers before we had those affordable, user-friendly PCs. That was a massive untapped market just waiting for disruption.
Wow, that's a great point. What other signals should we watch for?
Another big one is overshooting. This is where existing solutions have just become too complex or expensive for certain customers.
I can see that happening.
A good example is the semiconductor industry.
Right, with Moore's Law and that constant push for more processing power.
Exactly. It's led to some chips being more powerful than many customers actually need.
So there's this gap between what's being offered and what people actually want.
Right. And that gap creates an opening for disruptive innovators to come in with more tailored solutions that meet those specific needs at a lower cost.
Makes sense. So looking at these signals can give us a glimpse into the future of an industry. But what happens when these disruptive innovations actually start to gain traction?
Seeing What's Next goes into the competitive dynamics that unfold, and trust me, it can be a real clash of the titans.
Oh, I bet. The
Sure.
established players aren't just going to roll over, right?
Definitely not. And one of the key things the book talks about is the concept of asymmetries.
Asymmetries. What does that mean in this context?
Well, it means there are mismatches in motivation or skills between those big established companies and the newcomers. And these mismatches can give one side a big advantage.
So it's not always a fair fight.
Sometimes not. We've got two main types of asymmetries: asymmetry of motivation and asymmetry of skills. Let's start with motivation.
Okay, let's unpack that.
So, asymmetry of motivation is when one company has a big incentive to do something that another company is specifically not incentivized to do.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about a big established company that's laser focused on maximizing profits from their existing high-end products and services.
They're probably not too excited about investing in something that targets a lower-end market, right?
Exactly. They might even see seeding that lower end of the market as a strategic move.
Without realizing the disruptor might be coming for them in the long run.
Exactly. Now let's talk about asymmetry of skills.
Okay, so this one is about the different capabilities each side brings to the table.
Yes, incumbent companies are often really good at sustaining innovations, those incremental improvements to their existing products and services.
They've got the experience, the resources to do that well.
Right. But disruptive innovations often require a different skill set entirely.
So the skills that made the incumbents successful might actually hold them back when facing a disruptor.
Exactly. They might not have the agility, the risk tolerance, or the customer focus needed to succeed in a new market or with a new business model.
It's like their strengths become weaknesses.
In a way, yes. And that's what can give the disruptor a real edge.
So understanding these asymmetries is crucial for both the established players and the disruptors.
Absolutely. Incumbents need to recognize their vulnerabilities, while disruptors need to find ways to exploit those asymmetries. It's a high-stakes game.
It sounds like it.
Okay.
This has been a really insightful look at how disruptive innovation plays out in that competitive landscape. But seeing what's next also points out that it's not just about the companies themselves.
Right.
Governments and other sort of non-market forces can play a big role too.
Right, absolutely. Governments can really influence the pace and direction of disruption.
Through policies, regulations, funding.
All of that. They can create environments that either really help or really hinder innovation.
So government policies can be a double-edged sword when it comes to disruption.
Exactly. On one hand, they can promote innovation by, say, providing access to key resources like spectrum, or offering incentives, though those need to be carefully designed.
Right. We don't want to create any unintended consequences.
Of course not. But then on the other hand, governments can also create barriers to innovation through regulations and legal hurdles.
Sometimes those barriers are there for good reasons, like protecting consumers or ensuring fair competition.
Absolutely. But they can also accidentally stifle disruption by making it tough for new companies to get a foothold.
Do you have an example of that?
Sure. The book talks about Leap Wireless. They were trying to shake up the wireless market with this innovative prepaid service, but they had a really hard time expanding their network.
Because of limited spectrum availability.
Exactly. Spectrum is a crucial resource for wireless communication, and the government controls its allocation. So even though those regulations might have been well-intentioned, they ended up hindering Leap Wireless's progress.
It just goes to show how complicated this all is. Governments have a powerful role, but it's important they use that power to actually encourage new ideas and benefit consumers in the end.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of complex, this discussion about government brings us to another fascinating concept from Seeing What's Next: the wheel of disruption.
Okay, what's that all about?
It describes this cyclical process of how disruptive innovations actually drive economic growth. It's like a positive feedback loop where disruption fuels progress, which then creates even more opportunities for further disruption.
So it's not just about individual companies or industries, it's a force that pushes the whole economy forward.
Exactly. The book argues that disruptive innovations create new markets, which lead to more jobs, more investment, and overall economic expansion. And that growth then creates the perfect conditions for even more disruption to happen.
It's like a self-sustaining engine for progress.
Yep.
But are there things that help keep this wheel of disruption turning smoothly?
There are. The book highlights several factors, like flexible labor markets.
So a system where people can easily move between companies and pursue new opportunities.
Right. That allows for the kind of, cross-pollination of ideas that's so essential for innovation. Then there's access to capital for those disruptive ventures.
Because those ventures often struggle to get traditional funding since they seem risky.
Exactly. So a vibrant venture capital ecosystem is crucial.
It's not enough to just have good ideas. You need the resources to bring them to life. What else contributes to a healthy environment for disruption?
Well, you need competitive product markets. When companies are constantly trying to outdo each other, it pushes everyone to innovate. And then you need robust infrastructure, transportation, communication, energy.
It's like a whole ecosystem has to work together for this to thrive.
Exactly. But seeing what's next doesn't just talk about the theory. It dives into specific industries and how these concepts play out in the real world.
Which is exactly where we're headed next time. We'll be exploring those industry-specific examples.
Getting into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. So stay tuned because it's going to get even more interesting. Welcome back. Last time, we got a good foundation on understanding disruptive innovation. We looked at some key concepts from Clayton Christensen's Seeing What's Next.
Like those jobs to be done and those signals of change we need to watch for.
Right, and we saw how those big established companies, sometimes their strengths turn into weaknesses when disruption hits.
It's like they're so focused on those high profits and incremental improvements that they miss the bigger picture.
And that leaves an opening for those agile startups who aren't afraid to embrace lower margins and try out new things.
Exactly. Now, are you ready to see how this all plays out in specific industries?
Let's do it. Seeing What's Next has some really fascinating examples, starting with education.
Oh, education is definitely ripe for disruption.
The current system, with its high costs and that kind of rigid, one-size-fits-all approach, isn't working for everyone.
Yeah, it's leaving a lot of potential students behind. And some might even say it overserves others.
It's like we're trying to navigate the 21st century with a map from like 100 years ago. The book talks about some organizations trying to change things. One that stands out is Concord Law School.
Concord Law School is interesting because they offer online legal education, specifically for working professionals.
Those folks who couldn't attend those traditional brick-and-mortar law schools because of time constraints, cost, or location.
It's a perfect example of addressing non-consumption. They saw a whole segment of the population that was basically excluded from legal education.
And they use technology to open up a whole new avenue. So they're democratizing access to knowledge, creating opportunities for people who were shut out before.
Exactly. Seeing What's Next also mentions corporate training programs as another disruptor in education.
Yeah, those programs are increasingly using technology to deliver those custom-made, on-demand learning experiences.
Way more cost-effective than traditional degree programs, especially if a company wants to upskill their workforce quickly.
It makes a lot of sense. Instead of sending everyone back to school for a full MBA, they can get targeted training for specific needs.
Exactly. And it might even start to impact the traditional MBA market as these corporate programs get more sophisticated. Plus, we can't forget about those online education platforms that have exploded in popularity.
Coursera, edX, Udacity, all of those. It's amazing how they bring courses from top universities to anyone with internet access.
It's really remarkable. It makes you wonder about the future of those traditional universities, though, right?
Seeing What's Next seems to think those elite universities with their big names and resources are probably safe for now.
For now, yeah. But they'll face pressure from these alternative models if they don't adapt.
Complacency is a dangerous game when disruption is on the horizon.
The book even suggests that even those elite universities might miss out on big growth opportunities if they cling too tightly to the old ways of doing things.
So no one is immune to the forces of disruptive innovation. It's a good reminder for all of us.
Definitely. And it's not just higher education that's being disrupted. Seeing What's Next also looks at K-12 education.
They talk about innovations like charter schools and virtual schools. Charter schools are publicly funded but independently run, right?
Right, so they have a bit more flexibility in how they do things.
And virtual schools leverage technology to deliver education online, another alternative to the traditional classroom setup.
Both of them are trying to address some of the big problems in the public school system.
Things like overcrowding, limited resources, and the lack of personalized learning experiences.
They're trying out different approaches to see if that can improve outcomes for students.
It's really exciting to see how disruptive innovation is creating new possibilities and expanding access to quality education at all levels. But let's switch gears now and look at how it's impacted another industry, Aviation.
Oh, yeah, the airline industry has seen its share of ups and downs.
Pun intended.
Maybe.
Yep.
But it's definitely been a breeding ground for disruptive innovation. The book talks about the rise of those regional jets as one example.
Those smaller jets that fly shorter routes between smaller airports, they really opened up travel options for people who might not have had convenient or affordable air travel before.
Exactly. They created entirely new markets, putting pressure on those major airlines to keep up.
And speaking of shaking things up, the book also points to Southwest Airlines as a classic example of disruptive innovation in the industry.
Southwest, with its low-cost, point-to-point model, its emphasis on efficiency, and let's not forget, their legendary customer service.
They really forced those legacy carriers to rethink their whole approach.
For sure. Seeing what's next even explores the potential for even more disruption in the future, with things like those point-to-point air taxis.
It's like we're moving toward a future where air travel is more customized to individual needs rather than that traditional hub-and-spoke model.
Exactly. It's a great reminder that even industries that have already been disrupted can expect more waves of change in the years to come. Now, how about we take a look at an industry that's been all about technological advancement for decades? Semiconductors.
Oh yeah, the semiconductor industry. That's an interesting one because it's been so driven by Moore's law.
That relentless drive for ever-increasing processing power. But remember, we talked earlier about the concept of overshooting.
Right, where the chips are becoming more powerful than a lot of customers actually need.
And the book argues that we might be at that point now in some areas.
Which creates an opportunity for disruptors to come in with those customized, affordable solutions that target specific needs.
Exactly. And Seeing What's Next talks about companies like Tensilica, which are designing those customizable chips that are optimized for particular applications, rather than those one-size-fits-all solutions.
So instead of just cramming in as many transistors as they can, they're focusing on making chips that do a particular job very, very well.
And that shift could really change the landscape of the industry, giving those smaller, more nimble players a chance to compete with the big guys.
It's a reminder that disruption often comes from seeing those unmet needs and finding creative ways to address them, even if it challenges the way the whole industry has been thinking. Now, how about we look at an industry that hasn't always been quick to embrace change? Healthcare.
Oh, healthcare.
That's
That's a tough one. It's so complex and highly regulated.
But even in healthcare, disruptive innovation is happening. Seeing What's Next points to innovations that have already made an impact, like those home pregnancy tests.
Oh, those were a game changer. They took something that used to require a doctor's visit and put it right in the hands of consumers.
Empowering people to take control of their own health and making healthcare way more accessible.
Absolutely. The book also discusses the rise of nurse-based care, where nurse practitioners provide primary care services.
And often at a lower cost than physicians. That seems especially important in areas that lack enough doctors or for patients with more straightforward medical needs.
It's all about expanding access and making healthcare more affordable.
And then there's telemedicine, which has the potential to be truly transformative.
Yeah, with those virtual consultations and remote monitoring.
It can bridge geographical barriers and make care more accessible to people in rural areas or those with limited mobility.
Plus, it just makes healthcare more convenient and efficient for everyone.
Technology is opening up so many possibilities in healthcare. It's exciting. But let's wrap up our industry tour with one last stop: telecommunications.
Telecom. Another sector that's been totally transformed by disruptive innovation.
The rise of mobile phones, the internet, it seems like there's always something new shaking things up.
For sure. Seeing What's Next highlights Voice over Internet Protocol, or VoIP, as one of the key disruptions.
VoIP lets you make calls over the internet, bypassing the traditional phone network entirely.
Which led to new companies like Skype and Vonage, offering those cheap calling options to consumers.
And those VoIP providers really put the pressure on the old-school telecom companies, forcing them to adapt or get left behind.
Disruptive innovation in action. Lower costs, increased competition, and ultimately benefits for consumers.
It's a classic example. The book also talks about those cable companies becoming major players in the telecom market.
Right. Those cable companies that used to just focus on TV service, they leveraged their existing infrastructure to expand into internet and phone services.
It's like they became one-stop shops for all of our communication and entertainment needs.
That's what we call blurring industry boundaries, another sign of disruptive innovation at work.
Companies aren't staying in their neat little lanes anymore.
And that means we have to be even more aware of potential competition from unexpected sources.
Great point. Seeing What's Next also digs into the rise of wireless data services.
From dial-up to 3G and 4G, wireless data has changed everything.
It's hard to imagine life without it now.
It's created so many new opportunities for mobile operators, device manufacturers, app developers, everyone.
And let's not forget about Wi-Fi.
Yes, Wi-Fi, offering wireless internet access in those localized hotspots.
It's everywhere now, cafes, airports, hotels.
The book even suggests that Wi-Fi could disrupt the traditional telecom model even further down the line.
It just goes to show that innovation never stops. There are always new technologies and business models popping up, challenging the way things are done.
And that's why it's so crucial to study and understand disruptive innovation.
If we can grasp the forces driving these changes, we can anticipate the challenges and opportunities coming our way.
Exactly. We've covered a lot in this deep dive, from the theory to the real-world examples in all sorts of industries.
But what does it all mean for each of us? How can we use this knowledge in our own work and lives?
That's a great question, and that's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We've been exploring all these fascinating facets of disruptive innovation.
From those big theories to real-world shakeups in all sorts of industries.
Exactly. But now let's make it personal. What does all this mean for you, the listener?
It's easy to think of disruption as this, big abstract thing that happens in the business world.
Right, like it's something those CEOs have to worry about, not me.
But it actually affects all of us, no matter what we do.
So even if I'm not running a giant company, I still need to be aware of these forces of disruption.
Absolutely. Think about those signals of change we talked about.
Non-consumption, overshooting, modularity, all those things.
Right. Those are clues you can use to anticipate disruption, no matter what field you're in.
So I can use them to spot potential shifts and new opportunities, whether it's in like education or healthcare or something else entirely.
Exactly. But maybe even more importantly, it's about developing the right mindset.
Okay, like what kind of mindset are we talking about?
A mindset of curiosity, adaptability, being open to change.
So it's not just about understanding how disruption works, it's about having the skills and the attitude to thrive in a world that's constantly changing.
Exactly. One of the biggest takeaways from Seeing What's Next is that disruption isn't something to be afraid of. It's actually a force for progress.
Right? It drives economic growth, it creates opportunities, it can even improve our lives.
But we can't just sit back and wait for it to happen to us.
We have to be proactive.
Yes. Embrace the changes, keep learning, and always be ready to adapt.
So asking questions, challenging assumptions, maybe even stepping outside our comfort zones a bit.
All of that. The future isn't something we just predict, it's something we create.
And this deep dive has given us the knowledge to do just that, to navigate those waves of disruption and create a future we can all thrive in.
To keep those eyes open, those minds curious, and those spirits adventurous.
Because the most exciting discoveries are often just around the corner.
And that's how we do a deep dive. Thanks for listening.